So thank you very much. And some time ago, I had also a discussion with my good friend Richard. And he said, why don't you at the end of the session make a little synthesis? At the time, I thought this was difficult. After the forum, I know it's impossible, although Steve Denning just did the synthesis of this conference. And I would like to take my hat off to you for succeeding in doing that. Personally, I think that with such an increase in complexity, because the increase is hard to dispute, doing the right synthesis in an academic, elaborate way would take quite a bit of time, and I don't intend to spend next week doing it. However, I would have two suggestions at the end of our forum. The first one has to deal with our attitude towards complexity, and the second has to do with the role of executives. In terms of attitude, complex, complicated even, although I now understood that no Swiss watch is complex at that time, which, you know, explains their low prices. But very often, when things are described as complex, where things are described as overly complex, there is an attitude which consists in mourning complexity. You know, that's so bad, it's too complicated, too complex, etc. One mourns complexity. And I think that we have seen in these 2 days, and therefore we have learned of ourselves, that the right attitude towards complexity is not mourning complexity, but celebrating complexity. And let me give you 3 examples of that. The first one is, you can say, for example, that the role of classical institutions is now limited. They are kind of circled by so many things that it restricts their role and power, that even it threatens their very existence. The celebrating attitude consists in saying that institutions are now in a position to open to the external world in ways which have never been achieved. And this is not only a different set of relationships with their own ecosystem, but it is also projecting themselves and relating to the world through their very products. Something we discussed in the parallel session is that more and more the products, and in a different sense the services of companies, will remain connected with these companies, sending data back, sending data into the field, and this is an extension of the role, an opening of the corporation, and a prolongation of their footprint, which is spectacular and which we should all celebrate. The second example has to do with employees. You know, in the good old days, one knew that an employee had a contract and that he or she was working 8.25 hours per day within the company and completely closed off from the rest of the world. And now employees are kind of in a slightly more ambiguous position, belonging to professional networks around the world, doing things at the office which are maybe not completely directly connected to what they are supposed to do, etc., etc. We can mourn this development. What we can celebrate is that the company, the enterprise, now has access to the millions of resources which can contribute to its intellectual power. And this is a new dimension of the company. And the third example I take is customers. And you know, Mr. Drucker always placing customers at the center. And the customers now have much more power than they had, because they no longer are seen by enterprises as individuals or businesses, in the case of B2B companies. They are seen as having the power of the networks to which they belong. And that develops a countervailing power to the corporation, which one could mourn. Conversely, customers are becoming producers. So one can jujitsu-wise exploit that power of the customers and make them work, become producers for the good of the company. That's what I would call celebrating this new dimension. The second point has to do with our traditional role as leaders, executives in companies. And you know, Julia was saying, what is new in this role? A very good question. I think these roles remain quite, in principle, quite similar to what they were, but they gain importance in some respects in a very significant way. And all executives have been trained, and the good ones are actually doing it, is to translate for their shareholders, for their customers, for their employees, is to translate complex sets of ideas, of ambitions, complex constraints which are put on the company. The good leaders succeed in translating those into simple messages, into simple directions, into immediately understandable priorities. And I think that with the complexity we are dealing with, this capability and this quality of executives is more needed than ever. And I think that executives have to take out of that complexity what is needed to lead their organization. And I would describe that as creating simplicity with a purpose. And this purpose has to be addressing actually two major categories of people. The first category is the category of the employees. One needs to do that for one's own people. And the remedies have been, or the main points of the simplicity have been discussed in the session we just went through, namely a clear accountability, giving the opportunity for employees to self-organize whenever possible. And even from a technology standpoint, it is the duty of the top management of leadership to make sure that the good things which technology enables are not overwhelming employees and actually embarrassing them with an embarrassment of riches. For example, the information I need when I'm filling a shelf in my shop early in the morning has nothing to do with big data. It just needs to tell me, put that box into that second shelf on the left. And I think that top leadership has a duty to be using all of these instruments to create the simplicity which enables workers, employees, to deploy the best of their creativity and their competencies. And then again, the second target of simplicity needs to be the customer. And the customer, one always said the customer should be at the center of the organizations. Actually, now there is a risk that this is happening. And when the customer is in the center of your organization, you might not want to have him or her there, because it could be slightly disturbing. But customers actually have expectations which have grown with their own understanding of technology. They enjoy technology and the simplicity of technology and the power of technology immensely. And therefore, the corporation needs to, and this has been said this afternoon more eloquently than I could, corporations need to take all of the work they do for customers and translate them into what many people call the single customer experience, where the customer deals with the corporation in the same way or in a comparable way, if it's physical, if it's through that channel, if it is through a distributor, through a dealer, the whole experience of dealing with the corporation should be the same. And I think this is, again, one of the first priorities of leadership in this new world, to make use of all the power given by complexity to the enterprise and translate it into the simplicity with the purpose to provide a rich but unified and satisfying single customer experience. That's what I would submit to you, a new attitude and reinforcing our role as creating simplicity. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for being there, and more importantly, give the floor to Richard for the official closing of our forum. Thank you very much.